Leo's in.
Leo is in.
Yep.
It's recording. All of it.
Awesome.
All of it's recording.
But you don't have a heartbeat background sound. I think that means no.
I have sound effects that I got for the other doohickey.
Meetings that you have.
Huh. I didn't think about that. I'll fool with it.
Another day. Welcome back, everyone. We are
Something about Catholics. I thought you wrote that into here as like a different piece.
from our previous episode. We realized that we never said our baby's name, and we had named our baby before we had a burial at Belmont Abbey that we referenced. So we briefly just wanted to say that we ended up naming our child Ambrose Raphael Barrett. There's a cool story on that. We were preparing to bury our baby. Okay, that part's not so cool, but stick with me. We were trying to come up with a name, and I pulled up saint names just for Catholic fun. Haha. You could do another sound effect for that.
I didn't know if it was appropriate or not. I don't know what's appropriate anymore. So
When Ryan married me, he realized that dark humor is very much okay with myself and my family. So dark humor is a source of joy in hard times. When I was looking for a name and I came across the name Ambrose, I read that St. Augustine was deeply influenced by St. Ambrose's sermons. His eloquence and their relationship ended up helping contribute to St. Augustine's conversion. We have a godson named Augustine, Augie for short, and I thought it would be pretty cool that our baby could have one of probably many missions of looking out for Augustine, Augie on earth. This thought gave me comfort. I said the name aloud to Ryan in the next room, and he loved it right away.
true story.
Then I thought to myself that a cool middle name could be Raphael, but I wanted Ryan to pick the middle name. Something told me to be quiet and let him pick. And we both talked about how it would be cool to have an angel name as the middle name. Ryan happened to look up at me and say, "You know what would be a good middle name? Something like Ambrose Raphael." And thus our baby was named Ambrose Raphael. Quick side note on St. Raphael. St. Raphael, the archangel, is one of the 7 archangels, and he's known as a healer and guide, especially for travelers and those seeking healing. His name means God heals. Feels appropriate here. And do you want to talk about how you ended up choosing what was on the tombstone? The phrase?
Yeah. I was trying to find something that was masculine, maybe in tone, and also something that kind of signified what we as a couple had gone through, and anchoring on the fact that despite everything, God was at the center of all of the things that we had gone through, right? So there's not a perfect summation of how to do that, but something that kind of popped out to me while I was doing some research is the Latin Christus vincit, which means Christ conquers. And I thought it wholly appropriate that Christ conquering death, Christ conquering the world through biblical proclamation just felt like it was a fitting piece to this story, because through it all, despite all of the craziness and the trials and tribulations that go along with losing a child, it felt to me that Christ conquering all of it was an appropriate way to kind of put a punctuation at the end of this particular event in our lives.
Thought it was a really good reminder.
Because even though it's sad, there's also some victory in it, because even though the baby was never fully developed, we still believe that there's a soul there, and we treated the baby as such.
Mm-hmm. Did you say something at the beginning of that, of wanting to pick something? How did you word that?
Masculine.
Yeah, why masculine?
It just felt masculine.
What felt masculine?
It felt like a victorious, it felt masculine to me. I don't know.
Like masculine for yourself or for the baby?
For the baby.
Do you feel like it was a boy?
I don't know.
That's what was hard about picking a name too, because we have no idea, but I have the sense that it was.
A boy?
Yeah.
Maybe. It just felt appropriate. I can't tell you other than I had a feeling.
Yeah. And someday, if we make it to heaven, we can
ask about it.
Have that conversation. It was a boy or girl. Hope the name was acceptable. Oh, I just remembered something else.
Well,
okay.
Real quick. just to be clear, Christ conquers, specifically the Latin that I pronounced earlier, the Christus vincit. It is a Latin phrase that signifies victory of Christ over sin and death. And it is a core belief that we hold to be like the center of everything we believe, I guess I should say. So saying that is symbolic over Christ's victory over sin, over death, over evil. And it's also a reminder of Jesus' resurrection and his power to overcome all of those challenges that go along with it. So if I haven't beaten this to death yet, no pun intended.
It has meaning. It has meaning.
There is a meaning that I felt went along with it.
It's a powerful meaning.
And if you want to take it a step further, the phrase is actually used during the solemnity of Christ the King, which is the feast day celebrating Christ's kingship.
Mm.
So
fascinating.
There's that.
Thank you for sharing.
Yep.
I heard more than I did when you originally picked it out. So I remember when we were getting ready to pick out what was going to be on the tombstone, when you added that, I was like, where did that come from? And then you told me what it meant.
Yeah. I wanted it to be significant. So
it is.
Now there's a little marker in the middle of Belmont Abbey where we met and got engaged, and now there's a piece of us there.
There is.
So
it's weird but cool. Lots of emotions. Quick thing I just remembered. So when we picked out the name while we were waiting for the tombstone to arrive and be placed there, I ended up going to Belmont Abbey. They have a bookstore, and you can also purchase Catholic items there. And I cannot remember her name, but there's a woman that works at the bookstore. And I was looking around for a little while, and I kind of just in my sadness wanted to walk around by myself. But she asked me a couple of times if she could help me with anything because she's so nice. And I finally said, do you have a book on St. Ambrose? And she was like, She looked around and she was like, I'm not sure. She couldn't find it, but she looked back at me and she said, I'm so glad people are using that name again. That was my brother's name. And I was like, oh, okay. I ended up finding the book we now have in our house, on St. Ambrose. I'm sure there's more than one, but a book on St. Ambrose. And I like pulled it up and showed it to her like before I went up to buy it. And I was like, this is the story of why I'm looking for it. And she was like, oh, wow. And she just apologized for what we had been through. And then she was like, I go walk through the cemetery sometimes, so I will note where your baby is now as I go walk around. She just thought it was neat that they now on the perimeter of the cemetery have a space for if someone loses a baby at a young age or just in like miscarriage type of way. And there's a monk at Belmont Abbey who not so long ago took that on as his vocation. It took him like his cause. I just thought it was cool.
Yeah, it is a vocation that he's taken on there.
Yeah. Anyways.
I can't remember his name.
It wouldn't be, that's okay. It wouldn't be.
Brother Tobiah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gave him a bottle of beer.
Yeah, he's one of the monks at Belmont Abbey that's responsible for brewing their beer. And so we had a fun little discussion about that because I'm very big into craft beer.
Yeah. And that wouldn't be a thing at the cemetery without his wanting to take that on.
I guess now that we've talked about that, we want to get into talking about the Sacred Heart, right? So today, Jessie had recommended we talk about the Sacred Heart of Jesus and why June dedicated it as such in the Catholic Church and why it's so beloved.
Yeah. Found this little explanation. Through tradition, it's customary to consecrate each month to a particular devotion dedicated to cultivating specific virtues in honor of that devotion. This practice also aids in focusing our mind to meditate on specific topics related to the devotion. And June, the theme is the Sacred Heart. Obedience, piety, and dutifulness are the things that can come from pondering that. One of the reasons that I also wanted to talk about it is I've almost heard a theme from friends and family where people are looking for a feeling of love, belonging, some kind of pull, and not finding it. They're lonely or they feel alone in the world. And I don't know if it's since COVID or for a while now, in like a slow moving way with conversations I'm having with people and how our culture has changed. But it feels like people are looking for a sense of belonging, something they're missing, a deep sort of longing and not being fulfilled. I think an option is that we can sit and ponder the Sacred Heart of Jesus and God's burning love for us. Could be one source of comfort when nothing else seems to fit. Almost like time pondering the Sacred Heart and how it burns for us. Christ can conquer our fears, our isolation, our hopelessness, etc.
Yeah, I tend to agree that there does seem to be kind of a feeling in the air of many people feeling that way, myself included, about the fulfilling piece.
Mm-hmm.
But I've heard from many people just in brief conversation over the last year and a half that they feel lost.
Yep.
And that something is missing. And it's interesting to speculate if COVID was a piece of this, because I do feel like during that 2-year period, it created a
forced isolation
that I don't know that it has ever come back to normalcy, regardless of what people in prominent media positions tell us.
Yeah, or like what we as just like people intend to do.
Right.
Like if you're trying to make those connections because you feel lonely, I'm still hearing from people that's so hard to do. Like if you want to make new friends or if you want to date or anything like that, I've heard from people it's really hard.
Yeah, I would agree.
What
So I
else?
think what you're saying about pondering the Sacred Heart is likely a good place to start. I remark again that I don't know sometimes how I would get through the day to day without the Catholic faith to believe in. I don't mean that to, or mean to say that to be belittling or anything in any way. I know people have different things to cling to, but during that separation, during that time of all of us being in forced isolation and not being able to go visit family, um, and even some of us having family members pass away and not be able to be by their side when that kind of thing happened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have a real bitterness
Mm-hmm.
about a lot of that, and it's not something that I have forgotten about, but I think that's a little different than people that were forced into isolation and were just by themselves and didn't have a religion, didn't have something greater to attain to kind of fall back or lean on.
Yeah.
Because if we really believe what we believe in, then even during some type of forced isolation, we still have God, we still have prayer, we still have something to look forward to that's greater, even if in the moment we feel like we're kind of small and trapped and alone. And without that peace, I'm not really sure where that leaves somebody.
Yeah. Helps anchor you. And for me, from the faith perspective, it's okay to feel small when putting it in perspective with Jesus. But if I didn't have that, then I just imagine it would be like a feeling of being swallowed up. That would be awful. So we don't have to fear him and we don't have to do things alone. Honestly, we can't do things alone, like we were just talking about. I think some people may be suffering because of this, like thinking that we know better, maybe just being exhausted with the things happening in the world or not knowing. We can sit in this sort of love and offer our sufferings back to Jesus as a source of comfort to sustain us. And for me, growing up, I don't think I ever heard that perspective. Maybe it was just from the churches that I ended up attending, or if it's that the various perspectives have changed since then. But I think it's different to put things in the perspective of a place of love versus I'm going to be punished if I do X, Y, and Z. All right. So let's start with the big picture. The Sacred Heart is all about love, divine love, specifically the immense burning love that Jesus has for each of us. Not a poetic metaphor, but a real beating heart. It was wounded, pierced, but overflowing with mercy.
I'm trying to remember, like, many, many years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it, like, when we were talking about this topic and doing this topic, it came back to me. We can totally edit this out if it doesn't add any value, but when I was in grade school, like I think elementary school. So elementary school here is kindergarten through fifth grade. And I specifically remember like being in second or third grade and I had to go get something from the principal's office. Not that I was sent there. I had to go get something from the principal's office or give something to the principal from my parents. I can't remember what the reason I was there was, but for some reason, I remember there was a kid who was like really problematic in one of my classes, and So just so you know, like, try to make this as concise as possible. In first through fifth grade, you basically had the same group of people that you were in the same class with.
Mm.
So you kind of like knew them from year to year to year to year. And then middle school, it got a little different. And then high school, it got way different. So I had kind of seen this kid, as being problematic from year to year. But when I went into the principal's office that day, he had a picture of, it was like a drawing of the Sacred Heart. And it was this kid, this problematic kid had drawn it. And I don't ever know what the connection was there, but like I'm 99% sure that if this kid was anything, he was likely Baptist, because a lot of the kids that went to the school that I went to, the vast majority of them were like Southern Baptist, because that's just what that demographic was in that area.
Yeah.
But I always found it interesting that he decided to make a picture of the Sacred Heart, and I wonder,
why did he have that? Because you weren't at a Catholic school.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why he had given it to the principal and why it was there, but I think his name was on it or something. And I don't know, my brain was probably not developed enough to ask the question, but it's always stuck in my head. So it must have made some type of impact that the image of the Sacred Heart would make some kind of impact on somebody that doesn't necessarily believe in like Catholicism, for example, because I see that as a very Catholic image.
Maybe he was given a vision too.
Maybe. I don't know.
Do you want to talk about the saint that had a vision for it? Or
About Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque.
Because it'll help give a visual for what the Sacred Heart image looks like for us if no one has seen it and or Googled it yet.
So Margaret Mary Alacoque, and part of the reason that this is interesting to me is one of the ladies I used to work with at St. Benedict Press was very into St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, and I remember her talking about her frequently. And I believe we also had one of the books maybe that came down from Tan Books in Illinois was all about St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, but just one of those names that's like interesting to me.
It's a fun one to say.
It's got a very interesting pronunciation. But I need nothing but God and to lose myself in the heart of Jesus. These were among the last words of St. Margaret Mary Alacoque. And she was a French nun who lived from 1647 to 1690. And her entire life was devoted to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So, just very briefly, she was born into a large Catholic family, and she was the fifth of 7 children. She exhibited a devotion to Christ from a very early age, especially to the Blessed Sacrament. "O my only love," she prayed, "how indebted I am to thee for having prevented me from it tenderest youth, for having made thyself master of my heart." At age 15, she was bedridden, and she prayed to the Blessed Mother, promising in front of her whole family that if she was healed, she would take religious vows. She was instantly cured.
Wow.
Margaret entered the Order of the Visitation at Paray-le-Monier at age 23. It was here that the Lord Jesus appeared to her on 3 separate occasions to impart to her the mission of spreading devotion to his Sacred Heart. Although initially filled with fears of her own unworthiness, she received consolation in his words, "Fear nothing, I shall be thy strength."
Awesome.
It was on the feast of St. John the Evangelist, the beloved disciple, that Margaret received the first apparition. Once being before the Blessed Sacrament and having a little more leisure than usual, I felt wholly filled with the divine presence. He made me rest for a long time on his divine breast, where he discovered to me the wonders of his love and the inexplicable secrets of his Sacred Heart. Jesus showed her his flaming heart and told her that he could no longer contain his burning love. He wanted to pour it out on all of mankind, and she was to spread the message to the world. In the second apparition, Jesus instructed Margaret to devote the first Friday of every month to his Sacred Heart and pray for an hour between 11 p.m. and midnight every Thursday. These two practices, now known as the First Friday devotion and the Holy Hour, have since become very popular among Catholics. Finally, the third apparition occurred during the octave of the Feast of Corpus Christi. Jesus asked her to establish a feast dedicated to his Sacred Heart on the first Friday after the octave. And I promise that my heart shall dilate to pour out abundantly the influences of its love on all that will render it this honor. Margaret's superiors were initially skeptical of her revelations, but when she fell mysteriously ill yet again, and the doctor could find no remedy, her mother superior suggested that Margaret pray to God for healing. If the prayer was granted, it would be a sign of the truthfulness of her claims. Margaret did as she was told and again was immediately healed.
So cool.
Just to be brief, in dedicating herself to the Sacred Heart, she labored for the rest of her life to spread the devotion. She wrote that, "It seems to me that I can breathe only to increase devotion to the heart of Jesus. I should die content could I procure it any honor. Provided I love Jesus and that he reigns, it is enough for me." She and some fellow Visitation Sisters produced and distributed an image of the Sacred Heart and various small prayer books containing devotions they had written. Their success was considerable. The demand for them everywhere increased. The sisters received permission from their bishop to celebrate the Feast of the Sacred Heart locally, and the devotion began to spread rapidly throughout France. St. Margaret Mary passed away in 1690, accelerating the spread of the devotion even outside of France, as books were published on her life, including accounts of her visions and miracles that became attributed to her intercession. When the Great Plague of Marsville, the last major outbreak of bubonic plague in Western Europe, took an estimated 100,000 lives, the bishop of the city publicly consecrated it to the Sacred Heart, and townspeople attributed the plague's abatement to the act. Today, there stands in Marseille a basilica of the Sacred Heart. The devotion was also heralded as a powerful response to the rising tide of Jansenism in Europe. Indeed, the Jansenists, who rejected God's universal love for mankind, were the strongest opponents of the movement. In 1765, the devotion to the Sacred Heart was officially approved by Rome, and in 1856, the Feast of the Sacred Heart was made a universal solemnity by Pope Pius IX. By 1899, Pope Leo the 13th, 13th composed an act of consecration that dedicated the entire human race to the Sacred Heart. In his 1956 encyclical, Pope Pius the 12th wrote, "It is altogether impossible to enumerate the heavenly gifts which devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus has poured out on the souls of the faithful, purifying them, offering them heavenly strength, and rousing them to the attainment of all virtues." More recently, Pope St. John Paul II wrote, "I wish to express my approval and my encouragement to all who in any way continue to foster, study, and promote devotion to the heart of Christ, identifying the heart of Jesus as the heart of the Church." So that comes from, again, Word on Fire, and that was an article that was published in October 16th, 2023 by Edita McNichol and that was titled St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, Disciple of the Sacred Heart.
Her feast day is October 17th, so that's probably why. Leo really did want to be part of the podcast. Yes. Did you see that? Is it 42 or 43? She lived to 42 or 43 years old. These young, impressive people have accomplished so much.
And I wonder why I feel unfulfilled.
Oh, it's because you've grown up with these grand stories of saints. Your parents did well. So it also says that she's the patron of, obviously, devotees to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the loss of parents, and polio patients. Just as a side note. There's also a litany of the Sacred Heart. I think you covered the rest of those things.
I think the big question is why June?
Why June?
It's underneath your picture.
I had gone down. Great question. The Feast of the Sacred Heart falls 19 days after Pentecost, so it usually lands in June. This year, we celebrate Pentecost on Sunday, June 8th. The Feast of the Sacred Heart will be Friday, June 27th this year. And I know we talk about novenas a lot, but there is a novena to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, if anyone's wondering. There's also a litany. But if you want to pray the novena to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and you wanted to end it on the feast day of the Sacred Heart, you would start on June 18th.
Which is coming up for once, instead of us playing catch up.
And talking about something after it's happened. We're talking about it before. EWTN has the novena posted on their website, or you can just Google it and it comes up.
We could put it in the show notes.
We could. Another cool fact I found was St. Padre Pio recited this novena every day for all those who requested his prayers. And part of the novena says, "Sacred Heart of Jesus, I place all my trust in you." He basically said, I think, most of the rest of this.
I don't know that I read your quote there at the end.
You did a portion of it. The one where she described her experience.
Mm-hmm.
That one. He likes this topic. St. Margaret Mary described her experience of the Lord in these visions, saying, "My divine heart is so passionately fond of the human race and of you in particular that it cannot keep back the pent-up flames of its burning charity any longer. They must burst out through you and reveal my heart to the world, so as to enrich mankind with my treasures." Following this revelation, Jesus united her heart with his in a fusion of mystical love and joy. What was that like? And if you want to participate in this devotion, you can start your day with a short prayer like the one we mentioned, Sacred Heart of Jesus, I place all my trust in you. You could also display an image of the Sacred Heart at home. Bonus points if it's in your kitchen. And you can also do acts of reparation, little sacrifices, little kindnesses offered up in love.
So it looks like she was canonized in 1920 by Pope Benedict XV. Her feast day is October the 17th. And there is something else that I wanted to share about this. So I have a number of friends with whom I have a book club. And by book club, I mean that we read something either Catholic or Catholic adjacent once every couple months and then get together to discuss. And the title that kind of kicked everything off was one of Flannery O'Connor's titles. And so, if you don't know who Flannery O'Connor is, she's a really interesting Catholic author who really, really has a dark sense of humor. And I believe the title that we started out with was actually Wise Blood. So, just real quick. Flannery O'Connor was American, and she lived from 1925 to 1964. And in that time, she wrote 2 novels and 31 short stories. Being from the South, a lot of her titles pulled from like a Southern Gothic type style. But what's interesting about her books is not only does she pull from this Southern setting, her characters are often very grotesque, and many of the situations within these books is very violent and uncomfortable. And she often has kind of like an underlying unsentimental acceptance or rejection of limitations. And there's a lot of imperfections in the characters. And she sometimes pins this on things like disability, race, crime, religion. Some people are just flat out insane, but it's always kind of like it's what adds to all of the drama or how a lot of these stories unfold. But why I bring her up is she often reflects on Catholic faith, and she's always trying to, there's a lot about morality within her stories, right? And a lot of what this comes back to is the fact that she herself spent a great deal of time not being able to get around because she herself was stricken with polio. So she was a devout Catholic. And I believe she also, let's see here. She also had a devotion to the Sacred Heart.
That's cool.
And so the church that she attended in her hometown of Milledgeville, Georgia, was largely funded by members of her family and was named after the Sacred Heart. So there's a story about this, and it goes a little like when 2 traveling companions.
I want to know what happened with the traveling companions.
Well, okay, so
it's okay. I'll be quiet.
I was trying to research a little bit more deeply about how Flannery O'Connor connected to the Sacred Heart, because I know that she had a devotion to it. And I came across this website called Catholic Mom, and it's part of Holy Cross Family Ministries. But there was an article by Roxanne Solonin called His Sacred Heart Beckons. And she writes, in more recent years, the Sacred Heart has been drawing me. While studying Flannery O'Connor in her life, I learned of her devotion to the Sacred Heart and the church in her hometown of Milledgeville, Georgia, which was largely funded by members of her family, was named after the Sacred Heart. When 2 traveling companions and I toured her home at Andalusia Farm, we were struck by a photo of the Sacred Heart in the hallway. Since she'd mentioned this devotion in her letters, collected in The Habit of Being, seeing this depiction of the Sacred Heart made us feel as if Flannery might be puttering around the house somewhere, still physically with us. Years later, things got even more real when her husband, the lady who wrote this, who'd been the picture of health until then, received shocking news. After a routine visit to the doctor, a significant murmur had been detected, requiring open heart surgery. For one, they'd never spent a night in a hospital in their 49 years together. So the prospect of this being their first hospital sleepover was really scary. Trying to process the news that night, her husband pointed to a picture of the Sacred Heart that the author had taped to her bedroom mirror and said, "My heart's broken like his." At that moment, Roxanne writes that her own heart was struck and recalled a novena card a friend had given her not long before. She left it in her car after their visit together, and it seemed like a good time to retrieve it. She showed it to her husband, a convert who'd never prayed a novena. The surrender novena card had Jesus' heart written on its cover. She asked, "Would you like to pray this novena with me?" He surprised her, and that prayer became a valuable source of consolation throughout surgery and recovery. Later, when he had to go through a second open heart surgery due to a glitch in the first, the surrender novena brought incredible solace. Around the time of his second surgery, a friend reached out, asking if he would be interested in 2 statues from Spain he was giving away. They were about a foot tall, and the Sacred Heart of Jesus and Immaculate Heart of Mary. Roxanne said yes, and the 2 statues now stand proudly on her husband's dresser, just a few feet from their bed. She says most mornings when she wakes up, they're the first things that she sees. No matter how much I might dread getting out of bed, she writes, their faces and hearts rouse me to meet the moments God has in store. She writes, it's been many years since she attended the hometown church in Poplar, Montana, her hometown church in Poplar, Montana, and gazed upon the Sacred Heart statue there. But she can clearly see it in her head. It's taken her years to understand just how precious the Sacred Heart of Jesus is, and she's so glad that God gave her the chance to learn the truth of it. She also writes something that's kind of a nice way to encapsulate this. Jesus' Sacred Heart is a safe refuge, the only real sanctuary in this world. There we can trust that no matter what is going on around us, his love for us and the whole world will bring it all around rightly. There we can seek the security and stability that only he can provide. There we find unconditional, unfathomable love and mercy and eternal, trustworthy companionship. The Sacred Heart beckons us all. It is beckoning you this day. All you need to do is open your heart to receive it. I just thought that was a cool story.
It's an awesome story.
So,
thank you for sharing it.
Of course.
It was a great one.
Is there anything else you want to add?
Do you think it's used in stained glass windows anywhere other than Catholic churches?
I don't know. I know it was on that little picture that I told you was on.
That's what made me wonder that, because if
somebody saw it and like put it in their head.
Yeah, like if a kid at your public school was drawing it, I wonder if it's anywhere else that like wouldn't necessarily occur to us because you and I see it like in churches, and then I don't know, would it stand out if we saw it other places necessarily?
That's a good question.
It's interesting. Thanks for listening. I'm kidding.
Thank you.